What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back. And I am bringing you the always exciting top Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. Tons and tons of Pokemon card auctions to go over, folks. I'm going to try to do it as fast as I can while also adding some context of my own. So we saw tons of sales on eBay, PWCC, and Heritage Auctions had quite a block as well. So, folks, I got to shout out today's auction recap sponsor. It is, of course, lowpopping.market on Instagram. If you are looking for investment-worthy grails, you have to check out lowpopping.market on Instagram. Beside me here is just a mere fraction of what's available for sale or trade. Yes, rather than trying to free up cash to buy something, you can trade for any particular item on here. Lowpopping.market ships worldwide and accepts multiple payment methods as well. Lowpopping is extremely knowledgeable about the Pokemon card market. So if you have any questions about the buying or trading process, or any questions about a card that you're interested in, shoot them a message and I'm sure they'll be more than willing to help you out. So after this recap, go over to Instagram, follow lowpopping.market. I will, of course, link that in the description below. And as I always say, folks, you will not be disappointed in the selection they have for you. Alright, folks, I have a massive variety of auction sales that occurred this past week for you to feast your eyes upon. Let's get started off with the newest Pokemon trading card game classic. Both the Japanese and the English cards sold this week. Here are some graded Japanese cards. First up, we have a PSA 10 Holo Venusaur that sold this week for $113. The PSA 10 Holo Blastoise sold for $132.50. And the Pikachu here sold for $207.50 as a Gem Mint 10. And then, of course, the Big Bad Charizard sold as a PSA 10 for $350. And then we saw some raw English copies come by in auction. Here's a Holo Pikachu that sold for about $31. The Venusaur here sold for about $36. Blastoise sold for an even $50. And then we had the Holo Charizard sell for $157.50. And you gotta wonder what these cards are gonna sell for in the graded card market as CGC 10s, PSA 10s, BGS 10s. Will they match the prices of the Japanese graded cards? Or sell for more? Less? Your guess is as good as mine. We saw this CGC 10 Gem Mint Unlimited Base Set Charizard come by on eBay, sold for $3,150. We saw a first edition Red Cheeks Base Set Pikachu in PSA 10 that sold for $3,450. And then we saw this non-holo Charizard from Legendary Collection got the PSA 10 and sold for $1,870. And this card, of course, comes from the very expensive Lava theme deck from Legendary Collection. And up next, we have a couple of very expensive Topps Techno cards. I believe there are 4 different variations of the Topps cards with Pokemon. There's Chrome, Sparkle, Spectra, and then you have the rarest of them, which I believe is Techno. So you have a Techno Dragonite card in PSA 9 that sold for $3,499, and then you had a PSA 10 Techno Eevee card that sold for $4,750. Up next, we saw a couple of very expensive Japanese crystal cards in PSA 10. Here's a Crystal Celebi that sold for $3,050. The Crystal Ho-Oh sold for $3,200. And the Crystal Lugia here sold for $5,900. And then lastly on eBay from TCA Gaming, we saw a first edition Team Rocket booster box sell for $12,148 this week. And then onto the weekly PWCC auction block, we saw a ton of Gengar sell. So we'll be comparing the prices of these Gengars between CGC and PSA. Here's a CGC 10 Gem Mint Fossil First Edition Gengar, sold for $1,050, and a PSA 10 copy sold for $3,050 on eBay. We also saw a CGC 10 Gem Mint Sabrina's Gengar from Gym Heroes First Edition that sold for $1,470, while a CGC 10 Pristine example sold on Heritage for $2,500. And then back to PWCC, a PSA 10 copy sold for $3,120. And then lastly, for Gengars, we saw a CGC-10 Gem Mint Dark Gengar from Neo Destiny that sold for $930. Here we have a Mewtwo Holo from Diamond and Pearl Majestic Dawn in PSA 10 that sold for $1,110. Here is a BGS 10 Black Label XY Promo Mega Campaign Poncho Pikachu card that sold for $1,200. And then we saw this BGS 10 Black Label Stamp Box Pikachu card that sold for $1,230. And then here's another Black Label Pikachu. This is the Japanese World Collection Holo that sold for $1,350. From XY Flashfire, we saw the Full Art Charizard sales at PSA 10 for $1,380. And then we saw two of the Charizard cards from Diamond and Pearl Secret Wonders sell as PSA 10s. They both sold for $1,920 this week. Here's a World's Champions PSA 10 Japanese Gold Star Jolteon that sold for $2,520. And then we also saw this Japanese World's Champions Gold Star Flareon card that sold for $3,240. Following that was this 2009 Promo Daisuke Club Gold Point Pikachu Holo that sold for $3,960 as a Gem Mint 10. And then here's a very interesting sale of a 2002 Japanese McDonald's Holo Fire Energy autographed by Himino. The card graded a PSA 10 and the autograph got a 9 and it sold for $5,040. And then we saw a lineup of the Japanese Misaki promo cards. Here's a holographic Golem in PSA 10, sold for $1,890. The Holo Machamp sold for $1,920. The Almastar promo sold for $1,950. And then the holographic Alakazam sold for $6,300. And then the most expensive Misaki promo would have to be this Holo Gengar that sold for $28,800. What do you think of that? And then to finish off this auction recap, we'll be going over several sales from last night's Heritage auction block. Here is a first edition PSA 10 Shining Raichu, sold for $1,750, while the Mewtwo sold for $2,625, and the first edition Shining Tyranitar sold for $3,125. Then from Neo Revelation, we saw the Shining Magikarp first edition card sell for $2,875, and then the first edition Shining Gyarados sold for $6,562. Couple of interesting Rayquaza sales. Here's a Rayquaza Holo from the Pop Series 1 that sold for $812, and then here is the Rayquaza EX Black Star promo, got the CGC 10 Pristine grade and sold for $1,805. We also saw this CGC 10 Pristine Reverse Holo Pikachu from Skyridge that sold for $1,375. And then from Evolutions, we saw the holographic Charizard in PSA 10 make a little bit of a comeback. Lately, it's been selling for $1,200, $1,300. This week, it sold for an even $2,000. So, yeah. And then some PSA 10 English crystal cards came by. Here's a Nidoking from Aquapolis that sold for $1,875. The Ho-Oh sold for $4,500. Crystal Lugia sold for $8,125. And then the Japanese Crystal Charizard sold for $9,375. Here are two interesting Japanese card sales. Here is a Mysterious Pearl Winter Challenge promo card in PSA 10 that sold for $6,125, along with this 20th anniversary Pikachu Festa card that sold for $8,125. And then we're going to finish off this auction block with some base set cards. Here's an unlimited Chansey Holo in CGC 10 Gem Mint condition that sold for $1,062. Here is an unlimited base set Charizard in PSA 10 that sold for $9,375. And then we saw a CGC 10 Gem Mint Japanese base set Charizard that sold for $2,520. Here we have a shadowless PSA 10 Venusaur from base set that sold for $2,250. And then on PWCC, we saw the first edition PSA 10 base set Venusaur that sold for an even $12,000. And then back to Heritage, we saw a CGC 10 Gem Mint first edition Clefairy that sold for $2,500. A CGC 10 Gem Mint first edition Ninetales sold for $6,562, while the CGC 10 Mewtwo Holo sold for $7,500. And the auction of the week, we're going to go all the way back to eBay. I know we're flying in between auction houses this week. I'm sorry, it's been tough to organize this video, but it would have to go to this EX Team Rocket Returns booster box that sold for a staggering $28,467. And you all know the heat you can pull from this box. the very first gold stars in Torchic, Mudkip, and Trico. So that would have to be the auction of the week to me, folks. Thank you so much for watching, folks. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to give the video a like on your way out, and don't forget to be a subscriber if you're not already. We are really close to 30,000 subs, so I appreciate you helping me out. That's all I got for you today, folks. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll catch you all in my next one.